The news now on BBC One with Fiona Bruce and Matt Barbett.
8 men are held after one of Britain's biggest anti-terror operations involving 700 officers. Police find half a ton of chemical fertilizer, a key ingredient for bombs in previous terror attacks. Tonight, the suspects, all young Britons of Pakistani origin, are being questioned at a London police station. We'll have the latest on the police operation and what provoked it. Also tonight, a new leak over immigration. Applications from Romania and Bulgaria are stopped. President Bush forced to back down over the September the 11th Commission. And after 50 years of penning letters from America, Alistair Cook has died.
So good night and goodbye.
In BBC London News, so who is living next door? Neighbourhoods on the alert after the anti-terrorist raids and the row over a quilt between artist Tracy Emin and these schoolchildren.
Good evening. A massive joint operation between Scotland Yard and MI5 has foiled an alleged terrorist plot. 700 police officers raided addresses across London and the southeast this morning and arrested 8 British men of Pakistani origin, aged from 17 to 32. Police also seized half a ton of ammonium nitrate fertilizer, the same explosive ingredient used in the Bali bombing and the attack on the British consulate in Istanbul last year. Margaret Gilmore is at Britain's most secure police station, Paddington Green in London, where the suspects are being held tonight. Margaret.
Fiona, these raids today follow months of surveillance by anti-terrorist and MI5 officers, and those arrested are being questioned as we speak behind me here. Now, police are trying to establish how well they knew each other. They're also trying to find out whether or not the 8 were operating in effect as a small cell planning terrorist attacks here in the UK. At dawn today, 24 raids carried out simultaneously across southeast England. Operation Crevice had been planned for weeks, with homes and suspects under surveillance. At this storage depot in West London, police discovered half a ton of ammonium nitrate fertilizer, of a type frequently used in the past to make bombs.
It's about 6 by 2.
It was in a bag like this. The fertiliser's now being analysed in police laboratories. The raids took place at 6 a.m. in London and surrounding counties. 5 forces were involved, as well as officers from MI5. The fertiliser was found in Hanwell. There were 8 arrests in Crawley, Uxbridge, Ilford, Slough and Hawley.
Today's operation, which involved some 700 officers in total, is part of continuing and extensive inquiries by police and the security service into alleged international terrorist activity. And I must stress that the threat from terrorism remains very real.
3 of those arrested, including 2 brothers, lived in Crawley. All detained are British of Pakistani origin. 7 of them were aged 22 or under, the 8th was 32. As searches continued through the day, police held talks with Muslim leaders at each location. Officers who've been tracking the suspects and watching these premises for weeks do not want to alienate the communities the suspects come from.
The overwhelming majority of the Muslim community are law-abiding and completely reject all forms of violence. We have a responsibility to all communities to investigate suspected terrorist activity.
Forensic searches of the homes and businesses raided are likely to last days. Police have been removing files, documents and computer equipment. Those arrested are being held under the Terrorism Act on suspicion of planning or carrying out acts of terrorism. Security sources say they may have foiled a terrorist attack, possibly against civilian targets. They are describing today's developments as one of the most significant operations they've carried out for many years.
Margaret, thanks very much. Well, ammonium nitrate seized by the police today is a common farm fertiliser that has been used in the past by terrorist groups to make bombs with devastating results. In recent weeks, the police and the government have repeatedly warned that terrorists could be planning attacks in Britain. Here's our security correspondent, Frank Gardner.
Well, counter-terrorist officers believe that a major terrorist attack on Britain may have been foiled today, but so far nothing has been proven. Police have been on high alert here for months, with Britain thought to be a prime target for certain Islamist extremists who hate the West. The chemical seized by police today was ammonium nitrate stored in a bag just like this one. On its own, a harmless farm fertilizer, but in the wrong hands, a deadly ingredient for a powerful bomb. It's been used before by the IRA, by Al-Qaeda, and in the Oklahoma City bombing. More recently, fertilizer was used in the Bali bombing that killed over 200 people, and in Istanbul last November. Experts believe it's become the worldwide weapon of choice for militants linked to Al-Qaeda.
But it's cheap, it's easily available. When mixed with fuel oil, it can become a deadly weapon with conventional explosives. And it's an ideal mass casualty weapon. The aim here is not to destroy a building. The aim here is to kill as many people as is possible.
When the IRA bombed the Docklands in '96, they used over half a ton of fertilizer. You can see the results there. But a bomb needs a detonator, and the police didn't find any today. If it was a bomb plot, as they suspect, then it would have been in the early stages. Investigators say the targets were public places, not government buildings. But I'm told that no specific target had yet been chosen. Well, tonight the press is already talking of Al-Qaeda connections. These have yet to be proven. But there is no doubt that Al-Qaeda's leadership would like to deal Britain a painful blow. Their recent recorded messages talk of revenge for Britain's military intervention in Iraq and in Afghanistan. There are fears that Al-Qaeda may already have sleeper cells right here in this country.
We know they have repeatedly threatened attacks against the United Kingdom, and we know that they have boasted of having people, operational cells organized here. The police believe that more than one cell has been active, and this investigation may well help to produce more information.
The threat of an Al-Qaeda attack here brought troops to Heathrow Airport last year. Britain remains in a high state of vigilance. This month, the head of the Metropolitan Police, Sir John Stevens, stood side by side with Mayor Ken Livingstone and warned that an attack on London was inevitable. Against this alarming background, MI5 in the anti-terrorist branch have been working flat out to try and foil anything that looks like a plot, even if the arrests don't actually lead to convictions. Well, tonight there was no shortage of security around the Queen. Even her closest friends were having their identities checked at a private party. The police clearly taking every precaution. Well, what we've seen today is the largest anti-terrorist operation in years. In this current nervous climate, there may well be many more in the pipeline. Fiona.
Thanks, Frank. Well, let's return to Margaret Gilmore at Paddington Green Police Station. Margaret, we've had arrests of terrorist suspects before, but what we've seen today points to a new potential danger from within.
Absolutely, Fiona. In the first months after September the 11th, a lot of the people who were arrested were foreigners, people who were just here temporarily. Now, what we've seen in the last 6 months is the arrest of far more people who are British born and bred, who are part of our society, and that brings problems. Firstly, rightly or not, there are some sections of the Muslim community who feel that if they fit a certain profile, young, male, for example, they may be wrongly targeted. Now, if there is a tiny minority who are terrorist suspects, then the authorities are going to have to deal with this alienation. They need everybody within that community on side and not offside. And that is why we saw today a real change in tactics. The raids themselves were far more low-key than normal, even though there were a lot of them. And we saw them followed up immediately by these meetings with Muslim community leaders who, I've spoken to some of them, they were phoned out of the blue, they were called in for meetings, they were briefed on what was going on, and they were asked to pass on a message of reassurance to other Muslims within their community.
Margaret, thanks very much. And Frank, what we've seen today appears to have been the product of months of cooperation between the police and MI5.
That's right, not just MI5. In fact, all three intelligence agencies were involved in this. MI5, MI6, that's the secret intelligence service that gathers intelligence overseas, and GCHQ, the government listening station at Cheltenham. So this was a very big operation carried out over several months with covert surveillance and eavesdropping and so on. Now, the big question tonight that is troubling investigators, that if they've got their answers right, and that if their suspicions are founded that these people were involved in this alleged plot, Why would British citizens be doing this? Because in the past, most of the suspicion has fallen on foreign networks, North Africans or others, who have infiltrated into Britain. The first al-Qaeda convictions here were 2 North Africans who were convicted in Leicester, for example, of aiding and fundraising for al-Qaeda. No, these are British citizens, and that's really troubling them as to why they would be motivated to do this from inside Britain, having grown up, born and bred in Britain. Why would they want to do this? That's if their suspicions are correct. We have to hold out the possibility that some people will be released, possibly even all of them, without charge.
Okay, Frank, thanks very much. Well, another day, another leak in the row over immigration controls. The Conservatives produced a letter suggesting the government was warned over a year ago of an organised scam in which Romanians were getting into Britain on false pretences. The government announced it was stopping all applications from Bulgaria and Romania while it conducted an inquiry. And the Immigration Minister, Beverly Hughes, fended off calls for her resignation, insisting she was neither incompetent nor dishonest.
British Embassy staff in Romania have been protesting about this for nearly 2 years. Romanians are welcome in Britain if they can prove they can earn their living, but warnings about dodgy applications were simply brushed aside by the Immigration Service back home. In a boisterous, often angry debate, the Shadow Home Secretary offered the government an unpleasant choice. Either this was all the fault of the Immigration Minister Beverly Hughes or the fault of her boss, David Blunkett.
Either he believes what I have described is a result of a systemic operational failure, in which case the minister is to blame, or it's a failure of policy, in which case he is to blame. Whichever it is, somebody, just somebody, should shoulder responsibility for this disaster.
The Shadow Home Secretary then released a swathe of letters that sometimes verged on the farcical. The British consul, who's now been suspended, wrote in October 2002 to an immigration official that applicants rarely know their business plan, cannot speak English, and have absolutely no knowledge or experience in the type of skills needed for their respective businesses. Those who applied included a one-legged roof tiler and a number of builders and electricians who knew nothing about bricks, mortar or electrical details. But he wrote the Home Office granted applications, unfortunately against our strongest recommendations. Even more damning, a letter from a senior Foreign Office Mandarin, Sir John Ramsden, to the Deputy Director of the Immigration Service, which was written in November 2002. He'd just come back from Bulgaria and warned of an organised scam that completely undermines our entry control procedures, which makes a bit of a nonsense of having a visa regime. He gave examples of the scam. 70 Bulgarians had applied to set up businesses in the UK and submitted virtually identical business plans. When questioned, they rarely knew what was in them, saying they were written by solicitors. But according to the Home Secretary, ministers only knew about the allegations at the beginning of this month, and his junior shouldn't take the blame.
The Sunday Times, the Tory party, anyone else can keep on throwing mud, but my right honourable friend is not resigning, she's not being sacked, and she has the total support of this side of the House.
And she did. Labour MPs rallied round the minister, condemning newspapers for demonising immigrants, and she wasn't about to quit.
I am neither incompetent nor dishonest, and I intend to carry on doing my job as long as the Prime Minister and Home Secretary wants me to.
The Home Secretary's protective arm wraps around her. One colleague said, David may have his faults, but he's loyal to a T. The political damage of a resignation would be hard to take as well. Home Office sources acknowledge this is very serious, and they accept that it looks as if ministers were kept in the dark and the system has failed. That report's going to make very uncomfortable reading. Mark Mardell, BBC News at the Home Office.
Home Office officials have flown to the British Embassy in Romania to investigate the claims that hundreds of bogus claimants are applying to work in the UK. For many Romanians, entry to Britain can seem like a dream ticket. Stephen Saka is there. Stephen.
Fiona, as you say, Home Office officials are believed to be here in Bucharest tonight, trying to work out what in the world has been happening at the British Embassy, which is just a few yards to my left here. We've been trying to find out too, but it hasn't been easy. Her Majesty's Embassy in Bucharest. Not exactly a welcoming place today. The ambassador wasn't talking. No one would say whether the so-called whistleblower, James Cameron, was even in town. He certainly wasn't at work, having been suspended. In short, things are tense at the embassy.
Stop the camera.
Scores of people showed up as usual for visas, many with the forms filled in and high hopes of getting permission to work in Britain. Now the question is, have thousands of previous applications been properly vetted? Alexandru Morarescu is a Bucharest lawyer specializing in immigration. He's angry that the British government has now suspended some visa applications. He's disturbed by talk of local lawyers fixing visas for wads of cash. It's the exploitation of desperation.
You know, it's like an American dream. Maybe you can call it right now the Britain dream. And every time there is a dream, there are a lot of people who exploit this dream. And there are a lot of people who want to make money, exploit these dreams. That's why we have now problems with human traffic.
Romanians have plenty of reasons to look beyond their own borders. High unemployment, poverty on a scale unseen in Western Europe. These people know they'll be in the EU in 3 years or so. Some want to get a head start by moving now. Thousands have already made it to Britain, but how many more will follow? This isn't just about Bulgaria, of course. We now know that Britain's immigration procedures are under scrutiny right across Eastern Europe. It's obvious that tens of thousands of people from here want to get into Britain. The question is, how many of them the British government is prepared to accept? Fiona, back to you.
Stephen, thanks very much. In America, the White House has bowed to mounting pressure and agreed to allow the National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, to appear before the commission investigating the September the 11th attacks. Ms. Rice, one of President Bush's closest aides, has been accused of not taking the threat of al-Qaeda seriously enough in the months before the attacks. Well, let's talk to Matt Fry, who's in Washington. Matt, what do you make of the fact that President Bush has been forced into something of a U-turn over all this?
Absolutely, Fiona. Well, this White House prides itself on sticking to principle, and on the whole it does. But in this case, the political pressure simply became too great. From Capitol Hill, from the Commission itself, from the Republican Party, and of course from the opinion polls. So they realized that any potential damage done by Dr. Rice's testimony to the Commission was not nearly as great as the real and continuing damage of her refusal to testify, because it made it look quite simply as if she and the White House had something to hide. The bigger question, I guess, Fiona, is does this leave President Bush damaged? The answer, according to the opinion polls, is a few flesh wounds but nothing fatal. And that's because no one here really believes that 9/11 could have been prevented. The far more damaging question, of course, is whether the Iraq war was a spurious war in the campaign against terror. But that, frankly, Fiona, is not up to the Commission to answer.
OK, Matt, thanks very much. The French Prime Minister, Jean-Pierre Raffarin, is to keep his job, for now. He'd offered to resign after the government's heavy losses in regional elections. Instead, President Jacques Chirac has ordered a cabinet reshuffle. But Jean-Pierre Raffarin is deeply unpopular and his long-term future is uncertain. Emma-Jane Kirby reports from Paris.
Keeping step with the president for now, but Jean-Pierre Raffarin must be wondering where he's heading. Today, he tendered the resignation of his entire cabinet. Mr. Chirac accepted, but asked Raffarin to stay on and head the new government. Yet the Prime Minister is about the most unpopular politician in France, the man behind a series of hated economic reforms which cost his party dearly at the regional elections. If things go wrong in this summer's European elections, analysts say he'll be a handy scapegoat.
Raffarin will not get back the support of the people. Jacques Chirac is asking Raffarin to survive and to take the weight of unpopularity upon himself.
The French people feel let down by their government. They've been asked to work longer before they can draw their pensions, and now they're facing cuts to their healthcare system. This woman says the government's full of nothing but hot air.
Economic reform is desperately needed in France if it's to bring its budget deficit back in line with the EU regulations. But Raffarin knows it's precisely his programme of economic cutbacks which has already cost him his popularity.
And with unemployment spiralling towards 10%, France is begging for a kickstart to its economy. Welfare benefits are also under threat.
I think things have to be done. It will be tough on all of us looking for jobs, but I think the reform is a good thing.
A new cabinet's announced tomorrow. Raffarin's safe for now, but his future is less certain. Emma Jane Kirby, BBC News, Paris.
A group of British cavers who were trapped underground for more than a week in Mexico have returned home. They were expelled after the authorities accused them of violating their tourist visas and making false statements about the purpose of their visit. The incident has strained relations between Britain and Mexico. Tony Blair has called for a crackdown on Britain's most persistent offenders. The Prime Minister said 5,000 criminals were responsible for 1 million offences every year, posing a huge threat to the safety and confidence of their communities. Among those most affected by their crimes are shopkeepers, often in deprived areas. Richard Bilton has been to one shop in Sheffield to hear about the problems they face.
It sits at the heart of its community. But the local shop for the people of Intake is plagued by the sort of antisocial behaviour Mr Blair wants to target.
Hey Phil, you all right? Yeah.
There's always a fresh briefing for the security guard.
Earlier on. There were two youths outside, one with white trousers, blue top. Another one came in, looked at magazines. They went down that way, they went up to the club.
Phil's only been here 2 weeks, and it is a tough brief.
If you're not buying anything, can you go out?
Crime and gangs are day-to-day issues here. The last guard challenged a shoplifter and was left with a broken ankle and missing part of his finger.
Very intimidating and very stressful. I don't want to be threatened because I've got a family. But at the end of the day, it's my job and someone's got to do it.
This is just kids going home from school, but it is later when the store takes on a different feel. It's after dark that the police say they are concerned that shops like this are like magnets. They attract large groups of youths and they attract trouble.
Have you got any drugs in your pocket? No. Are you sure? Why do you smell of cannabis then?
Right outside the door, and the police are called to a group of youths. In the last 2 months, they've been called to this area around the shop 49 times.
We're frustrated because you tend to just move them from one location to another without the ability to actually give them an answer to the general question of what can we do. Don't go wandering off.
Up the road, and a gang has gathered outside an off-licence.
Can I ask you to leave the area for me, please?
In Sheffield, the perception of crime is higher than the reality. Gangs hanging around outside shops add to the intimidation.
Nowhere else to go, we ain't got a youth club out. We've got nothing to do.
They're not alone, there are gangs moving around all night. Retail crime is a big problem. Violent attacks are up 39%, and those at the front line have had enough.
When I'm driving down the road and I see a youth with a baseball cap on, I automatically think shoplifter or troublesome youth when he obviously might not be. It makes you think that way.
Shops like this can be all some communities have. The gangs are in danger of driving even those away. Richard Bilton, BBC News, Sheffield.
The Prime Minister has led tribute to the broadcaster and journalist Alistair Cook, who's died at the age of 95. The news came only 3 weeks after Radio 4 aired his final letter from America. The programme was originally intended to last for 13 weeks, but ran for more than 50 years. The BBC's Nick Clark wrote Alistair Cook's biography. He looks back on his life.
Good evening. It used to be liquor, bootleg liquor, that made vast illegal fortunes for underworld characters in Chicago.
It was the longest letter, a 13-week series that lasted for almost 58 years. 11 presidents came and went. One generation of listeners succeeded another. Cook himself liked to say, the BBC forgot about me. And nobody knew that the letter of February the 20th would be the last.
Good morning. Propped up there against my usual 3 pillows, and reluctantly having just finished a favourite bed book.
He was an extraordinary man and a broadcaster probably with as much influence as any other, particularly in respect of the relationship between this country and the United States of America, and the depth and scope of his broadcasts, and also the intelligence, the very special intelligence he brought to bear, were an amazing thing. We're hugely missed by millions of people who used to gain such comfort and such wisdom.
Cook fell in love with America on a student fellowship in 1932. 2 years later, he returned to become the BBC's film critic, but he was a man with a mission to explain to Britain and the world what America was really like. And before long was charting the story of his adopted home for The Guardian and the BBC, its triumphs and disasters.
I heard somebody cry, "Kennedy, shot," and heard a girl moan, "No, no, not again."
In 1974, he was accorded a rare honour, the chance to address Congress.
I accept your nomination for the presidency of the United States.
If you asked Cook about his contribution to transatlantic understanding, he would say, "I was just a reporter," but not many will take that assessment at face value.
There have been two men in the past century who have done most to bring Britain and America together. That was Winston Churchill, who used the phrase a special relationship, and Alistair Cook, who represented America to Britain better than any diplomat ever did.
I first met Alistair a decade ago and often marvelled at his absolute determination to carry on working. He thought he'd die in harness. I thought so too. So when ill health forced his retirement a month or so ago, it came as a shock. And I don't think he was cut out to be an idle pensioner.
So good night and goodbye.
A final farewell from Alistair Cook, who died today. We'll be back a little later with the latest on the day's headlines, but now it's time to join our news teams across the UK. Bye for now.
Good evening from BBC London News. With the arrest of 8 suspected Islamic terrorists and the discovery of half a ton of bomb-making material, communities in London and the home counties are trying to understand how a possible terror attack may have been in preparation under their noses. Locals in Uxbridge, Ilford, Hawley, Slough and Crawley say they're shocked by the raids this morning, as are Muslim community leaders.
We don't support any kind of terrorism. Extremism is not allowed in Islam. And we always tried, to persuade the people, young people over here, that Islam doesn't believe in any sort of, Islam is a religion of peace.
Worried local MPs admitted this evening that they were seeking urgent talks with Home Secretary David Blunkett following today's events.
What we want, all of us as local MPs, is reassurance that everything possible is being done and will continue to be done to protect our constituents. My constituents particularly can always remember that the last crash at Heathrow was in my constituency and the IRA attack on the airport was launched from my constituency. We're always very nervous.
The artist Tracy Emin, who made her name with an unmade bed, is embroiled in a new row about a patchwork quilt, but this time with school children. Ecclesbourne Primary in North London says it wants to sell the piece that Emin made with them to raise money for an arts unit in the school. She says in that case, she'll have it back. Here's Sarah Harris.
It may be worth £35,000, but at the moment the quilt Tracy Emin helped North London school children make is being kept in a store cupboard at Ecclesbourne Primary in Islington. Teachers started to make moves to sell it because they can't afford the £4,000 needed to display it.
If we can't display it, then perhaps we should sell it, and the money raised would really help the school.
She may be known as the enfant terrible of the art world, but 4 years ago Miss Emin was doing her bit for the community, helping 8-year-olds with a piece showing what they think is beautiful. Now things have turned ugly. Teachers say they've had a letter from the artist's representative saying she wants it back. There was no comment from the Brit Art star today, but parents are backing a boost to school funds.
Do you think better to sell the quilt than keep it?
Oh, absolutely. If the children made it, definitely.
If it's going to help the kids with their schooling, get a better education, then yeah, I'm all for it.
Not everyone's impressed by Emin's work, calling it entertainment, not art.
We really do not want to see any more of Tracy Emin's autobiographical tosh. What she should do is buy it back and take it home and put her pet dog on it.
The problem is the quilt may be worth nothing without the artist's endorsement. Teachers say if Tracy Emin will pay for a display case, they'll put it up for future generations of the school to enjoy. Sarah Harris, BBC London News.
Police have launched a murder inquiry after a man's body was found in a London hotel. The Eastern European victim was killed in his room at the 4-star Marriott Hotel just off Oxford Street. He's believed to have checked in using a false name and was found by detectives on Sunday. The so-called cannabis king of South London was jailed today for 6.5 years. Flamboyant Errol Anderson made £1.5 million by serving the drug at his Greenleaf Cafe in Clapham. His wife, Audriana Witter, was also jailed for 2.5 years for money laundering offences. House prices will rise by 15% over the next year. That's according to the Nationwide Building Society. The market's been strong recently, with prices rising 5% in the first 3 months of 2004 alone. But analysts are predicting a slowdown in the second half of the year. A senior officer in the Met who is cleared of dishonesty has been charged by the Police Complaints Authority with 9 counts of breaking the police's code of conduct. Superintendent Ali Desai was cleared of dishonesty at the Old Bailey last year. He's rejoined the force. The Met and the Black Police Association say he shouldn't have to face any more charges and want the decision overturned. 5 youths and a 21-year-old arrested in connection with the murder of a West London teenager on Mother's Day have been released on bail. The mutilated body of 17-year-old Anton Hyman was found dumped in the River Brent in Greenford. Green Party mayoral candidate Darren Johnson says he'll call for a complete overhaul of London's transport system if he's elected into power. He's proposing to improve local transport services for cyclists, pedestrians and disabled people by scrapping new road building. The £1.2 billion he hopes to save will be reallocated to better facilities. The Greens also want a reduction in the speed limit from 30 to 20 miles per hour by 2006, except on most major roads.
This is not about penalising the motorist at all. We've got some serious traffic problems in London and we have some serious pollution problems. 1,500 people each year die prematurely in London because of appalling air quality here. We do need some radical measures.
An alcohol limit has finally been introduced for professional mariners on the River Thames, 15 years after the Marchioness pleasure boat disaster. The new regulations could soon be applied to leisure users of the river, including rowers, dinghy sailors and jet skiers. 59 people died in the Marchioness tragedy. A judge later concluded the crew of the dredger which struck the vessel had been drinking. For the families of the victims, tougher laws are long overdue.
I think people have to realise that it is a dangerous river. It's not just from the point of view of alcohol legislation that we have to monitor it, but also we have to be grateful for what we have achieved in putting the lifeboats on the River Thames.
And now here's Peter with tomorrow's weather prospects.
We'll keep clear skies overnight, so it's going to be another chilly night, but at least in the morning we won't have the mistiness that we had this morning. That's because the breeze will be a bit stronger. Sunny start to the day, but cloud increasing, and late afternoon into the evening we're likely to get the odd spot of rain. High water at London Bridge is at 10 in the morning and about 10:30 in the evening.
Well, that's all for this evening. We'll be back tomorrow with the main stories in London and the South East in breakfast on BBC One. Now it's back to Fiona. Bye for now.
And the main news tonight, 8 men have been arrested in one of Britain's biggest anti-terror operations. The suspects are young Britons of Pakistani origin. The police seized half a ton of chemical fertilizer, a key ingredient for bombs used in previous terror attacks. Visa applications from Romania and Bulgaria are stopped after claims the government was warned of an organised immigration scam using forged documents. And after 50 years of penning letters from America, Alistair Cook has died. Newsnight's getting underway over on BBC Two, but from all of us on the 10 o'clock team, good night.
Good evening. The sun arrived pretty much on cue across a large part of the UK today, and very pleasant it was too, particularly in Bournemouth, the warmest place at 18 Celsius, that's actually 64 Fahrenheit. But it was about 10 degrees colder along that northeast coast of England, just 9 degrees under cloudy skies with quite a brisk wind off the sea. That'll be the way of it for these northeastern parts through the next few days as well, I'm afraid. Not until the weekend before things change here. But that low cloud's been feeding in across the Aberdeen skyline. You can see the lights reflecting off that low cloud base, and that cloud moving on to sit across the hills of eastern Scotland and northeast England. So some of the higher level routes could be quite foggy at times through tonight. Visibility down to about 100 metres, but not a particularly cold night. Might be a touch of frost somewhere in the Scottish Highlands, but I think essentially a frost-free night. Lowest temperatures at around about 3 or 4 degrees. And then tomorrow there'll be a nice sunny start again for many of us, I think. Perhaps a little bit of misty low cloud just to start with across Northern Ireland, but that won't last very long. But along that east coast of England and Scotland, anywhere really from the Humber northwards, looks like a rather grey start to the day. Even some patchy drizzle coming out of the cloud across eastern Scotland, and that'll tend to stick around into the afternoon across these eastern areas. Go to the other side of the Grampians though, very pleasant day, lots of sunshine on offer and feeling quite warm in that sunshine as well. A few places could go as high as 15 degrees. But the northeast coast of England, another spot that's likely to see the low cloud continue to feed in off the sea. I think burning back to the coast in places like Newcastle and Middlesbrough, but even so, a bit of a chill in the air, particularly through the morning. But elsewhere where we get the sunshine, it will feel pleasantly warm. 14 for Northern Ireland, perhaps as high as 17 across North Wales. That could well be the warm spot of the day, and the sunshine continuing into the afternoon. But a change